Después se lava.
You see that migration is a global phenomenon, and you cannot escape of that. People need to move, will move, be it because they want to move or simply because they are forced to leave the country and to move. So we need to find ways to protect them. And human rights defenders are those who are protecting the rights of migrants. And because they are sometimes assimilated to migrants, they are themselves facing strong attacks by states and public officials that accuse them to be smugglers or to introduce migrants illegally to countries. And that's a phenomenon which is for me really worrying with the increasing number of countries in which we see populist leaders. Not only Hungary, but also Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, but also Austria, Italy. And although there are also countries in which you don't have those populist leaders. The power of those parties also in countries is so powerful that sometimes those who would like to refuse.
Semi-skilled labor as well as unskilled labor is moving across the continent, and it is a catalyst for a flow of knowledge and technology. Extra-continental migration, so the migration that most people would talk about in the media these days, thinking that Africans are all leaving to go outside of the continent, is important, but not as important as international African migration within Africa itself. Having said that, extra-continental migration is perhaps the largest purveyor of remittances to the continent. So talking about sectors that are much at a more advanced stage, for example, in some parts of the continent, and the same skilled labor is needed in other parts of the continent where those sectors are faced with a local population that does not really have what is required to work with these highly skilled sectors. One of them being mining. I think the continent has seen enough examples across countries where the mining sectors is, first of all, stuffed with foreign labor, not all from outside of Africa, but a big chunk actually from within Africa, before being able to train and hire local labor. So that's one example. The other example of how intra-African migration is promoting growth on the continent is, as I said, through trade. It's generally actually the other side of trade, the other side of the coin of what we say in the report of globalization is there are two sides to it, two faces. There's trade and there's migration. And there's a lot of progress being achieved on the trade front, and the report is supporting
to an increase of unsafe boats and boats that are left afloat, because rescue will be more likely.
Linked to the change in sea routes, but it's actually more related to the policies that were in place in Europe and the policy changes during the crisis. Let's start with the concept of search and rescue at sea. This is a legal and moral obligation that all vessels have to rescue boats in distress and disembark passengers in the nearest place of safety.
For the people dying
Coastal
at sea,
states have to ensure effective rescue.
They need to be aware that this is a problem for all.
Most drownings in the Mediterranean Sea are in Libya's search and rescue zone, so legally they have the obligation to help the refugees. Unfortunately, Libya has decided not to do anything about it, leaving thousands of people to die in their waters.
When 600 migrants died off the shore of Lampedusa in 2013, Italy launched a new operation, Mare Nostrum. The program rescued over 140,000 people stranded at sea in just the first year. The mission also effectively tackled smugglers' networks by managing to convict over 100 human traffickers. However, Next to that, a larger scope of operations is necessary to ensure that no boats sink unnoticed. This policy would save people from drowning in the most literal way. The solution is not a pull factor that attracts more refugees to Europe, as crossing the sea is still unsafe.
They only received half the funding, so there was a lack of money and thus resources. And the program monitored a much smaller area of the European coast. After several disasters at sea, Triton funds were doubled and the operational area was extended, but there was still a structural lack of personnel. Europe's effort to save migrants was insufficient, underfunded, and unproductive, especially in comparison to the Mare Nostrum program. In response to the growing casualties, several NGOs started sailing the Mediterranean Sea to search and rescue refugees.
In June 2015, the EU launched a military mission called EUNAVFOR-Med, which focused on countering smuggling networks. This was mainly done by destroying migrant boats, mostly after an NGO rescued migrants and brought them to safe lands. Because of this, smugglers started relying on faulty and cheaper boats, and they began putting more people in the boats, often without an engine, leaving them adrift and in hope of being rescued.
After this development, the total number of NGOs on search and rescue missions grew from 3 to 10. While Operation Triton and EUNAVFOR-Med are still in place and helping rescue lives, the bulk of the people saved at sea are saved by NGOs. In 2017, 37% of the rescues were done by NGOs, while in 2016 this was only 6%.
What makes the situation more complicated is the Dublin Regulation. Put simply, the Dublin Regulation decides which nation is responsible for processing a refugee's asylum claim. While it takes into account the main rule is clear. The first country
survivors who sort of report back how many people were on it. But those boats are not necessarily being retrieved, and the bodies just wash up when they wash up. And it could be washing up on the Libyan coast or on the Turkish coast, not necessarily in Europe, and are therefore not counted in the same way.
Some regions are struggling to come up with in the short term, in the sort of management of the current challenges. I think the compact will help enlighten different approaches to these crises, but it is essentially an agreement by member states to cooperate with a long-term vision on how to better harness the benefits of human mobility and how to mitigate its challenges. So they are struggling in dealing with flows of people in sometimes irregular situations in transit countries that are very poorly equipped to deal with this. I hope that
un ordre còsmic, que és consciència, unitat, amor, llibertat, i clar, s'estima, Gràcies per aquest regal còsmic que m'acabeu de... Feliç viatge de vida, de consciència, d'unitat i de llibertat.
to follow the same path, sometimes also tend to be vocal also on migrants. That's the case in France, that's the case in Spain, that's the case in other countries, in which you see that defenders of the right of migrants are now sometimes brought to justice.
And if it requires people having a slightly more open mind about communities receiving foreigners, they should just remember that's been part of our history and collectively to our benefit so far.
What is necessary is to reduce the casualties and to give refugees a safe place to live. Europe should aim for a coherent collective long-term solution, but small measures should also be taken, as this crisis is still happening right now.
They move sometimes out of utter desperation about the possibility for their own future, the future of their children. So I think it's really important for people to understand that migration is a thing. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing. It's a phenomenon that's been part of human history. It will be with us, possibly, I would say probably, in increasing numbers. There's going to be more of us on the planet.
The problem for many countries is that it creates a pull factor effect. That is, by creating legal pathways, more people will make the decision to actually try to reach Europe. So there might be even more casualties. People are coming anyway, so this might be the only way to stop people from trying it the illegal way. But countries don't want more refugees, they want less.
I mean, passion. I've been working with women's defenders since more than 20 years now. And meeting with families of defenders, families of disappeared, hearing moving stories of those families, seeing how they are treated by states, seeing that the UN could do better.
Founded for the most part in misperception, a kind of mythology about foreigners and so on, as though all of them, the 258 million migrants in the world,